Hey there everybody! Howdy once again from Carpo, and this video is strictly cannabis. So for any of my viewers who are the philosophical nature videos, this will be cannabis. For anybody who's into Kratom videos or other videos, this one's strictly cannabis. And I only say that because I don't do videos about marijuana anymore. And I've been asking myself why, and there's a couple reasons. First off, I find it somewhat tacky, and that's just my personal opinion. There are a lot of YouTube videos out there of people talking about weed, and in the past, I had a channel dedicated to just cannabis, and it's actually still on there, and if I start growing weed again, I'll upload it, but and start using it again. It's called Plant de Garden, like D-E, garden, and I'm pretty sure it's still there. I just haven't looked at it in a long time, and it's hard. I decided I can't keep up on multiple channels. I have an herb channel too for my Carpus Botanicals, and then I have another herb channel just for herb information. So out of 4 channels, I was like, okay, this is spreading myself too thin, and I hardly ever even use them. But anyhow, back to cannabis. I wanted to talk not just about cannabis itself and smoking it and using it, but growing it and some misconceptions, misunderstandings, as well as like things I've discovered. I mean, though I don't talk about weed, I consider myself pretty much, I would say, well educated on it, in the upper tier of people who are educated about cannabis. And you know, that's not to be egotistical, but just to say I know a lot about pot because I was obsessed with it. Actually, in high school, I wrote a report about, my senior report was about the medical benefits of cannabis, and this was in '94, and there was hardly any info out there, and that was the thing. I had to go on what I had, and that was very limited. But I actually wrote the whole thing without even references, and I did pretty good. I got like a B+, I think, or something. I can't remember exactly. It was a B or B+, but of course it was an alternative school where you could get away with something like that. I wanted to, before I get to cannabis itself and how it's changed over the years for me, because the second reason that I don't talk about it anymore is because I'm not that interested in it, and I don't smoke very much anymore. I don't smoke pot until the evening. So I just tried a couple tokes of my own, some that we'd grown, and all of my friends and I grew cannabis over the years. I guess I have a prop here I could use. This is a nice fresh bud. This is a diesel strain, I believe, but no, this one isn't diesel. I have a diesel, but this one I think is more like a, I don't know. It's basically one of my own seed strains that over the past few years, especially back with my medical card, I was growing for a while indoors, and I had a YouTube channel where I'd show all the plants and what was going on in the weed world, in my weed world. But I absolutely adore not just cannabis, but the terpenes within the cannabis that make it what it is. And over the years, I mean, yeah, somebody's probably thinking, oh my God, you're handling that roughly, and you know, I've just given up on pretending like, I'm not an elitist snob type cannabis user, let's put it that way. I still use metal pipes after 25, 26 years. Not always, but I'm not too proud to use a metal pipe. I'll still hang cannabis anywhere. I'm not, I won't say that a little bit of light's going to ruin the drying, and that's one of the things about growing that I wanted to get out in the open, was that greenhouse growing versus growing out in the open when it comes to outdoor cannabis. I've tried it both ways over the years, and the one thing I learned this year especially really drove it home was the fact that I prefer to grow outdoors in the rain as opposed to in a greenhouse. And a lot of folks want to avoid, you know, they want to be able to control their environment, and that's understandable, especially if it becomes a cold climate or where you have to control it. But cannabis can grow just about anywhere. And I live in the Pacific Northwest, and in Portland, Oregon area, we've got, you know, a pretty good climate where it's usually you can end up harvesting before the freeze comes, which in a lot of places that's not an option. But growing undercover seems better because you're not going to destroy the THC crystals. People are worried about damaging the buds. This year we've had nothing but fucking rainstorms. It's just been pouring and pounding and slamming my, you know, all the plants. everyone had, and a lot of people harvested early, and didn't want to deal with the rain. And I was just standing in a rainstorm the other day looking at a plant, and it was just covered in crystals, and just watching how nature has perfected the art of cannabis plant, where the buds will bounce off, the water bounces off perfectly. Let's put it this way: the more damage your buds suffer, you might lose a little THC on the outside, but your buds aren't generally harmed by rainstorms. Cannabis is designed to hang up, to handle that. But what is affected by is putting it in an unnatural environment where it doesn't get rained on and only gets sprayed by you and water in the soil. Those moths, I made a video last year talking about these moths. They're called, basically they're corn ear moths, I believe, but we call them bud moths, bud caterpillars. They will eat your buds and destroy them. So you'll get not just caterpillars, but bud rot, and then bud rot in places where the caterpillars were. And this also happens indoors, not the caterpillars, but the bud rot, if you're not careful. This time around, with the same strains, I had no problems whatsoever. No rot. I mean, we're talking 2 little tiny bud-size areas out of, so far out of mass, and it sat out in the rain forever. The other ones, it gives it time to condense the mold on it more. I had powdery mildew last year, bud rot, the caterpillars, because the butterflies land, they're the little white moths that look so innocent and beautiful. They land on any plant, and they lay their eggs by the hundreds, and then they hatch into little caterpillars, and they get about this long, then they drop off into the soil and burrow in, and then hatch again. That's the life cycle of these beautiful butterflies that eat all your plants. And letting nature do its job by pummeling them with rain and the elements will generally knock most of those down. I haven't seen a single caterpillar, and those things suck. So that's for outdoor. Indoor, I've found all kinds. I haven't grown indoors in a couple of years, but the number one thing is you don't need that much light. You do not need as much as people think. You might see these factories on these huge warehouses on TV where they have lights just hanging without, any real types of, any high quality hoods or anything. Just maybe a parabolic hood reflector, and they're sitting like way above the plants, and you're thinking, well, then you've also seen indoor growers where the lights are like within a couple feet and they adjust it as it goes. And then today there's LEDs, and there's so much discrepancy about how much a plant needs. You can overdo it, and you can overdo it with fertilizer. And I guess the point I want to make, because I don't want to talk about growing cannabis, I want to talk about the other aspects of it. But the one thing that I've learned, the most important thing about growing cannabis, is it's just a fucking plant. I heard this years ago, and I just couldn't, probably 20 years ago, somebody's like, just treat it like it is. It's a weed. It doesn't need that much. People feed them all these super organic fertilizers and swear that there's a difference in quality and taste and flavor. And in some instances, and with some supplements in a controlled environment, yeah, you can. Of course, I've altered terpene content and smell and whatnot, but it's not necessary is the point. Plants will generally take care of themselves if you follow the basic rules, and the less you mess with them, and the better they'll do on their own. And planting a little bit later than you would think, say in mid to late June, is actually preferable to starting early and having monstrous plants, because they'll only bud and yield so much regardless of when you plant. Don't get me wrong, if you plant huge monsters, but if you early in the year, that's one thing. I'm just saying if you want to keep them generally maintained and under control, you can plant a little later than people realize. And now I'd like to talk about the smoking aspect, because I really enjoy smoking pot, but not like I used to. I used to be an all-day smoker. Wake and bake is something a lot of people do. I'm sure a lot of you guys wake and bake, and it's like, I don't know, I guess what it is I value my morning time so much more, and I never realized that inebriation was something that I didn't really, that was doing, it's hard to describe. Some people say, well, it makes you lazy. Cannabis doesn't make people lazy. Cannabis gives you an excuse to not have to do anything if you're already lazy, But cannabis can be a huge motivator. I can smoke cannabis and focus on a project and get really into it. But it can also, in the long run, once you start to understand the effects from beginning to end and realize that there's actually different stages. At first, cannabis is somewhat stimulating for the first hour, and then it goes into kind of sedating. So if a person wants to smoke pot to get to bed, they might be better off to smoke, say, an hour and a half before bed. And for some people, it keeps them up all night. Some people get anxious. Some people, it can make them very anxious. And I'll tell you, I never had any of the effects of anxiety from cannabis over 25 years of smoking. Until about 4 or 5 years ago. I think about 5, something like that. Where I really tried dabbing for the first time, heavily, and I smoked a bunch of hash by myself. And just, I was at home with my family and whatnot, but I remember just being so ripped, and I was thinking it wasn't the same stoned as just being kicked back like, yeah, alright, I feel good. It was almost an anxiety-ridden high, and it was at that moment I realized, I started thinking about death and saying, life and death, all these different, dark things, and I thought, okay, there's something about this. There's a psychological aspect to smoking too much THC without the counterbalance of other alkaloids or cannabinoids. And if you don't know what the terms mean, basically smoking the whole plant or using the whole plant, eating the whole plant is better than just an extracted version of cannabinoids. I believe there's other alkaloids, but there's also other water-based there must be something about the synergy of the cannabis plant itself, but I think also it's not smoking so much at one time that's really the big thing. Because only people smoking heavy amounts of hash have had these problems of extreme anxiety and paranoia. And as the pot gets better, it really can be an issue. So we can't be in denial, that a person who's never smoked pot eats a pot brownie, they're going to be fucked up. I mean, really fucked up. I got a hold of some candies a few years ago that my wife brought home from work, and she's like, yeah, he said they were strong and they were small. And I was like, whatever. I've had strong foods. I make strong ass brownies, but I ate a couple. Next thing I know, I ate a couple more, because as I remember reading once, the problem with making marijuana treats is that once you get stoned, you have the munchies and you want to eat the rest of them, and you shouldn't do that, because eating cannabis can take a couple hours to kick in, and it can last up to 10, 12 hours. First time I ate pot, ganja goo balls is what they were called. They were at the Oregon Country Fair back in like 92, I think. And we were driving into park, and goo balls, people selling them, and they're just basically like organic oats and all these things mixed together with weed. And all I remember is when we got home that night, it was just like the most intense stoned I'd ever been. But I still don't use those edibles very often because they're too strong. They really are. I love knowing where the cannabis. I live in Washington. We got, of course, all of the growers. Most of the good growers test their weed and they post their results in the weed shops. I don't buy from a shop. I buy from a friend. But even like these herbs, I just have these over here for a different video I was going to do, but this is from the place I buy my wholesale herbs from, and like guarana, things like that. And they've got all the tests for like parts per million of molds and cordyceps tests and all these things. And I was like, that's what the cannabis guys are doing. They're making, they're actually testing not just for potency, but for impurities, and that's the future of herbs. I mean, not enough people are doing that. From China comes a lot of lead-filled crap, metal-filled, herbs and supplements, and that's a different subject altogether. But that's one of the beauties of having cannabis here, is that we grow it ourselves, and we can test it, and we know what works and doesn't. Cannabis is an accumulator plant, and that means that it can accumulate toxins and heavy metals within its buds and flowers. And I'm not sure historically or genetically or biologically why this is important or why the plant does it, but that means if you feed a high iron or a high copper fertilizer, the plant will accumulate that. and certain heavy metals, you know, may not be a big deal if you smoke a little bit here and there, but if you're eating it all the time and making ganja food, that's a different story. And I've made every type of ganja food. Mostly I love making brownies and caramels, and every year, actually around this time, I should make some more. But I also grew a strain called Harlequin Tsunami, which is, turned out, I think it tested at 14% CBD, or 13%, and less than 1% THC. And it kind of blew my mind. I thought, how can it just test that low? Because CBD, I know they have high CBD in that strain, but I had a hard time believing that until my buddy sent me a picture of the test results they sent back. So then they had hash made out of it, and it was 68%, I think 68.5%. Maybe it was 72. I want to say 72%, actually, because there was 2 different batches, but 68 to 72% CBD and like 4.5% THC. So there was some THC in there, or maybe it was 5.5, but it was enough to where you can't really send it or sell it. So I had a whole bunch of hash made from it, and it was like phenomenal for relaxation when I would mix it with THC. But by itself, CBD is pretty neutral. There is so much to placebo effect. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, you know, people who claim that they smoke CBD and they get a feeling from it instantly, that I'm not going to say that's not true. But I will say, in more cases than not, if you're smoking something you spend a bunch of money on that's supposed to relax you, or somebody makes a claim about, placebo can really take over and make you think that something's working. CBD is phenomenal for certain things, but there's still a lot of research to be done, so just do your own before you go buy a CBD supplement for a fortune. I mentioned that because you wouldn't believe how many people email me over a video I made about CBD years ago. It has probably more views than any of my other videos because people are so curious about it. And it's just a random, it's called the CBD Ripoff Report, but it's not really about, you know, people ask me, do you have a specific vendor? They'll say, I noticed that you sell CBD lip balm on your site. Do you sell CBD products? And I can't, because I don't want to get involved in that whole legal aspect of selling cannabis-based medicine, because, you know, it's unfortunate too, because it would be great to be able to market that too, along with Kratom, but it's just not worth it. At least not for me. I mean, cannabis is a tough industry. Mostly because, you know, Uncle Sam may not be willing to work with cannabis industries, but the states they are. And all the industries are. And I'll tell you this, Marlboro had a patent on Marlboro Greens decades ago. People have been ready for cannabis to be legal forever on a federal level. Companies will make a fortune. Already right now we have mass conglomerate organizations that are moving to legalize cannabis in other states. I think it was like Ohio or another state where they were trying to legalize cannabis, and they would have actually done it. The people learned that there was one company pushing for it, and the conditions deep within the fine print were that one group got to basically run the whole show. You know, it's like the fucking Wild West out there, and, you know, all the people who are against cannabis, all these right-wingers will be all of a sudden be like, well, if we can make money, we'll legalize it as long as we can hang on to it. As long as we can make all the profit. Nobody else is going to make shit. You know, huge grow operations. And I'll tell you, the federal government, they're completely nutless. They have nothing. They are, when it comes to cannabis and drug research, they're a complete joke. Like even down in Mississippi, where they grow the weed that's for the legal cancer patients in the U.S. And if you've never looked into that, do it. You know, it's fascinating. The original cannabis research project, where they give like 20 people, you know, legal prescription of like whatever 100 joints a month or some shit like that, and they still to this day, the ones that are still alive can actually still go get them. And I don't know how many there are, but there were some documentaries a while back on that. But you know, cannabis is really overrated today, and that maybe that's partially to blame why I don't even talk about it. It seems like whenever I see an ad where they show a chick with big tits and buds over them, naked chicks, I just facepalm. I'm so disgusted by society's use of women as sales pitches. It's actually fucking appalling to me. At this point, just can't stand it anymore. I know sex sells. Dude, we all fucking know sex sells. What a disrespect to the cannabis industry. And I would say that to any Kratom vendor out there who's using that kind of shit. Because I've seen some fucked up tactics used to sell everything. And it's kind of disturbing sometimes, you know. People are very tactless, but then I remember we're just people, you know. We're just people. It's like I was saying about some of the pervy men out there, you know. There's this whole... Wait, I better stop myself before I get into that one. I don't want to get into modern politics. I better stick to cannabis, actually. To tell you the truth, I'd really like to smoke a bowl. I don't have one on me. But I got my hash burner out in the house. Oh well. You know, I've always been into cannabis literature, cannabis art, all those things. I have the Cannabibles, which are, you know, basically books that have illustrations of the different strains of cannabis. And I have lists of all the different strains that I've grown over the years. You know, I'm going to look and see if I can see this notebook up here. Yeah, maybe it's right here. I'll see. Because I did see it a while back. But I'll flip through it while I'm talking. So anyhow, yeah, over the years I've really been fascinated with growing, keeping, you know, and documenting like all the different things that I do, and here we go. Actually, here's an old YouTube video thing I made for something else. But on the next page is this, which is just a list. I'm not going to explain it here. But it's Blue Blood, which is a strain I grew, and it broke down all the where it comes from. I'm so fascinated to know where the strains come from. So here are the strains that I've grown over the years. Shiva, Trinity, Trainwreck, two kinds. White Shark, White Rhino, Jack Herer, 50 Cent, which was a grape strain, Blue Blood, Crystallica. There's 4 different Crystallicas that I bred. AMS, Harley Sue, Durban Poison, 2 different Dogfathers, 2 different Alpha Chronics, 2 different male grape strains, a Gorilla Glue number 4, Synex Blue Blood phenotype, Critical Kush, OG Thai, and Blue Blood and Harley Sue. And the OG Thai is something I should talk about before I go, because it's been a fun cannabis video, but I can't go on forever about weed. A while back, one of my viewers on YouTube sent me a message saying he had some original seeds. Actually, he was a friend. I don't know where he went. He was the coolest guy. And I met him on YouTube like 6 years ago when I started, and he like, I loved the dude. He was just the coolest guy, you know, and he had a YouTube channel, but he didn't really use it for much. But we started talking, and turned out he was coming to Portland, and I invited him to come stay here with me and my family. So he came over, and he's the coolest guy. He brought us like gifts and shit. I'll show you the gifts he brought, actually, because they're right here. I use them in my meditation. And it was the funniest thing. He got us 2 of these little vases, and he said, "Oh, I picked them up at the airport." And there I was thinking, God, they're probably like $20. But the point was, he showed gratitude and brought a gift and hung out, and I let him stay the night, and we talked about shit. And I think it was a little while later where he said he'd run across these 1964 seeds, and I don't know if it was him or someone else, but that he had them in a drawer, and they were from Vietnam, that they'd been brought back at the end of Vietnam from Thailand, I think, or from Vietnam area. I'm not sure the specific how it was. If maybe it was Thai that was brought into Vietnam by the soldiers, but he claimed it was Thai from the 60s. So I grew it, and it was obviously, it took a long time to bud. It was obviously a hardcore sativa, and I still have some of the seeds left somewhere, but I tried to grow it once, and it was just they were obviously too hard to grow, but then I tried to breed it with another one, and actually I still have the bud itself, and I was going to have some hash made out of it, just specifically from that type, but we'll see. Anyway, I don't know what else to say. I mean, I very much enjoy cannabis. I guess if I were to pass a message on out of this, it would be, it's not the be-all, end-all of, you know, medicine, the way that people treat it. But at the same time, the benefits are so massively numerous that you can't ignore it. I am a pro-cannabis advocate. I believe it should be legal everywhere and available everywhere. And I believe that the terpenes within cannabis that give it, and when I say terpenes, I'm talking about essential oils. You know, that's where my real passion lies, is in understanding the depths of the alkaloids, the terpenes, and the cannabinoids, because I believe there are over 80 cannabinoids in cannabis, perhaps more, but we're still learning how many are actually active, besides CBD, THC. There's CBN, which can affect it, and the way that it metabolizes through heat, THCA into THC, and the way that the liver, the body treats it, when you eat it, it's a completely different experience. It actually converts it to a different form, which is much longer lasting. And we know that cannabis works because it's old school. And the thing about herbs is, there's such a stigma put on these things. I mean, it's sad that I have to sit here and even think, well, somebody's going to take this the wrong way, or somebody will think, oh, just a stoner. You know, like, the attitude that society has towards cannabis is very skewed. And I thought, you know, you smoke cannabis, and something popped into my head earlier about how some drugs don't affect, like, say, even like psychedelics, don't affect your motor coordination. You can totally function and walk around. But they do affect your judgment. Like, let's say light doses of certain things can make you, like, really think deeply. Whereas it seems like alcohol, the legally acceptable drug, as I'm drinking a beer, drinking a bunch of alcohol will just make you not think at all. But have no motor coordination whatsoever. Basically, the legal drugs are zombie drugs, and a lot of people think that that's a conspiracy. Well, why is alcohol legal but not cannabis? The people have spoken. It's not about... it's about the difficulty in keeping alcohol under wraps. And we saw what happened with Prohibition, and now we saw what happened with cannabis Prohibition. It just causes more problems. So we're trying to legalize everything and get it out of the way. Be like Portugal and legalize everything. You know, it's not the end of the world to have drugs available, and the problem being that cannabis gets lumped in with drugs, and it really is an herb, but it does affect some people differently than others, so it should be treated as such, not as something benign that won't harm anyone, because yes, some people are prone to have psychotic episodes, and cannabis in some people can not create that, but can make people more likely to have one, especially if they have edibles or very strong cannabis, you know? So I'll make this an open forum. If you have any questions about cannabis you would like answered that you think I might be able to answer, whether it's growing, smoking, or terpenes, go ahead and ask in the comment section, and I'll do my best to answer. And as always, I hope you have a wonderful evening, and I'll talk to you all later. And yeah, peace, dude.